The Miami GP has given us the twist that we desperately needed for an interesting 2024 season, and judging by the development made from McLaren, as well as the planned upgrades for Ferrari in Imola, Red Bull might be in bigger trouble when it comes to defending both championships this year. This is something that has been acknowledged by the Austrian squad as well, and with a weaker number 2 driver on their squad who is unable to follow his teammate at all times, could we see a shift in scenery? And more importantly, can McLaren and Ferrari be regular race-winning competitors? It's safe to say that McLaren's upgrades in Miami worked wonders, but in order for us to understand why Norris was setting the fastest laps on worn-out medium tyres while Verstappen was much slower on brand new hard tyres behind him, we need to have a look at the nature of their upgrades. McLaren brought as much as 10 upgrades to their car, including a new front wing, revised side pod inlets, new geometry of their front suspension, and revised floor and side pods that would work entirely with the bodywork of the car. These changes were only adopted on Norris' car in its entirety, which is why he was in a really good position to keep the lead after the safety car assist, as well as push Perez to go in the pit lane earlier than anticipated before the accident of Sargent and Magnussen. On the other hand, we saw Piastri keeping up with Verstappen at a 3-second difference and completing a pass on Leclerc, while successfully managing to keep Sainz behind for the majority of the race before the accident happened in the closing stages. What is worth mentioning is that the Aussie had only 50% of these upgrades, so from Imola onwards we're going to look at an entirely different MCL38 for Piastri as well, one that would be the same as Norris' Challenger. With the new upgrades, McLaren has managed to understand the aerodynamic characteristics of the car much better than they did up until now, and looking at the changes, you could see that the car is now much better at saving up the tyres and utilising the flow that passes underneath the MCL38. On top of that, the slow speed corners were one of the Achilles heels for McLaren, something that they've also managed to address in Miami. Even for Andrea Stella, the upgrades were surprisingly fast. They knew it would be a step in the right direction, but to successfully fight the RB20 and the SF24 is definitely not something that they could have anticipated before the weekend started. This is something that has been talked about by Verstappen, who feels like regardless of the safety car situation, McLaren would have won the race with Norris due to the fact that the race pace he had on the medium tyres, as well as the one on the hard tyres at the restart of the race, is something he could never have done himself. Adding further to this extent, Verstappen said, "I didn't really see Norris in the beginning because I was more focused on Piastri behind and the Ferraris, but then I boxed and I heard the pace that he was doing on the used mediums. I was like, that is quite insane. I would never have been able to do so. So I knew even if there wouldn't have been a safety car, that when we would come out on fresh tyres, I would have had to push on quite a lot to be able to keep him behind." But the track position of Norris is something that worked against him in Miami. Although he was much faster than Perez, even with the DRS, the straight line speed of the RB20 helped the Mexican keep Norris behind for a large portion of laps before he was forced to pit. And if McLaren wants to improve on this front, they would have to work their way up on Saturday. If it was Norris pushing towards Verstappen instead of Piastri, we might have had a different race outcome from the start, but that doesn't mean we were stripped of amazing racing, something that is very likely to now come in Imola as well. Jenson Button, the 2009 world champion, reckoned that Red Bull would be smart to keep an eye on McLaren in Imola and not just Ferrari, because once the Woking based squad starts developing their car in the middle of the season, then the situation is serious and they might be looking at fighting for race wins much more frequently than what they did last year. When talking about this matter, Button said, "The correlation between the simulator and the on-track data seems to be amazing at McLaren. The upgrades they had last year in Silverstone made a massive difference in terms of where the team will develop their car. It did what it said on the tin, and that is the most difficult thing in Formula One. I think in the next couple of races we are going to have an eye on them the whole time, and Red Bull is going to have their eyes on McLaren as well, not just Ferrari." So now it's very different in the way of thinking, because coming into a race weekend now, Red Bull know that they will be challenged from two teams and the strategy would have to change a little. They've got to be on their toes the whole time. The other issue that Red Bull is facing here is Ferrari, because the Maranello team is the only one to have not brought any upgrades to the track and still be closely competing with Red Bull and McLaren. As of now, the Maranello team is the second fastest on the grid, but after the Miami GP, a fierce warning has been sent towards them that McLaren won't settle for P3 and they will be pushing heavily for the remainder of the season. This is why Leclerc and Vasseur are heavily anticipating the upgrades in Imola, and when talking about them, the Frenchman went on to say that they are definitely worthy to put the SF24 at the top of the podium in their home race. Adding to this, Vasseur said, "I am sure that in Imola we will have a better race by putting everything together. We know that many have brought upgrades to these races, but we finished ahead. We are at the point in the development of the car where if you bring something, it's not a matter of seconds, but of tenths. It is not like a few years ago when everything brought 3 to 4 tenths. Without a doubt, we will be able to fight for victory in Imola, but I believe there is a gap that varies from track to track and from compound to compound, which makes more of a difference than an update. We must focus on our job, which is making the most of what we have. The update we will bring to Imola will certainly help, but it doesn't all depend on that. It also depends on the work we will do on the track." It is also not helping that Red Bull do not have a strong second driver in Sergio Perez, who spent the entirety of the post-safety car period fighting Hamilton, or more precisely defending against the W15, rather than pushing towards and fighting both Ferrari drivers. To make the situation even more stressful, Perez turn 1 shenanigan where he braked 50 metres later than everybody else and nearly took his teammate out of the race, has brought a lot of negative spotlight to the Mexican driver, as Verstappen pointed out that a small contact between him and Perez brought minor damage to the rear of his diffuser. To top that off, Horner also added that the cone incident in turn 15 that Verstappen caused brought up some damage to the floor of the car, as through further inspection a hole was revealed in the floor that is yet to be decided whether it had an impact on the downforce or not. Be that as it may, Red Bull were beaten on merit this time, and it seems like they would have to work heavily in order to continue with the race-winning mentality from Imola onwards, especially now that they have two teams that are threatening to dethrone them after just 6 races in the 2024 season. Of course, Imola is the race to which we're looking forward to, because we must see where Ferrari ends up with their upgrade package as well. And as Vasseur mentioned, it will be quite close, because we are in a period where tenths are determining the difference between a race winner and a midfield finish. With all this in mind, we could be having a proper 3-team battle from the 7th round in 2024, and with Red Bull's driver situation where Perez is constantly struggling to deliver the performance that's expected from him, there will definitely be a shift in the Drivers' Championship, at least when it comes to the P2 fight, and maybe even more exciting for the P1 spot as well. Do you think that McLaren has the package to win races more frequently? And more importantly, do you think that Ferrari will live up to the expectations from Imola onwards? Let us know in the comments below. And once you do that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.